I'm not going to gloat. Or maybe just a little bit. Maybe just a little bit. I have been dead on this issue. Dead on. And the only reason I've been dead on, it's not magic. It's taking into account the incentives and the motivations of the people who are around you or around a particular situation. And when we're talking about the Democratic Party and we're talking about one Bernie Sanders, we're talking about a group that is allied against him and would do whatever they can to hurt him while assisting the other person. With all of the shenanigans that took place in regards to the Iowa Democratic Caucus, Pete Buttigieg, well, first, a dodgy app that they were using to tally votes, a dodgy app where they use a testing server as opposed to a production server, where Pete Buttigieg has a fiduciary relationship with the company that's making this particular device. Pete Buttigieg has close ties to the Democratic Party of Iowa. And beyond all of that, Acronym, the company that owns that particular organization, Shadow, not creepy at all. And by the way, Shadow is full of Hillary Clinton staffers. And the person who runs it, I can show you a bunch of screeds on Twitter against Bernie Sanders in pro-Hillary. My point is, right off the bat, that stinks. The notion that you have a candidate running in a race with a fiduciary relationship with the company, not to mention staffers between these two, meaning the Buttigieg campaign and this particular company, and this thing is supposed to tabulate votes. You have a tether to one of the campaigns in the race. I guess I'm saying it doesn't take a genius to say that looks bad and you shouldn't do that. And the fact that they tried to hide that, meaning they hid that all the way up until the point where the numbers started to be released and all of these problems started to take place. Go further. The app fucks up entirely. Like I said, they were using a testing server instead of the production server. So right off the bat, that's just breathtaking incompetence. Almost look like incompetence on purpose, but let's just say breathtaking incompetence. Presidential election testing server. Instead of them releasing the numbers, which they have, by the way, they had the numbers for a while, they slow dripped the numbers. Now, in slow dripping the numbers, they gave a false impression that Pete Buttigieg was winning when Pete Buttigieg was not winning, because ultimately the numbers were already known. I hope you understand what I mean. Many of these precincts had already given their numbers, but what they did was slow drip the numbers. They gave the media a perspective that Pete Buttigieg was leading something that Pete Buttigieg might not necessarily was leading, considering they were only giving you 70% of the vote or 75% of the vote. But whatever vote tally they gave you, it was only just enough to keep Buttigieg in the lead and to drip out the information over the course of several days. This gave the perspective that Pete Buttigieg won because that little lying weasel screamed he won right off the bat. Now, either you're cheating or you're lying. I don't know which particular one, to be honest. Did Pete have an inside track on the numbers where he could kind of make that assertion? Even if your own number showed you having a dominant position, there is no way you could know if you flat fact won. And it is sleazy to declare such. People start analyzing the numbers. Some of the numbers that the DNC was printing out or that the Iowa Democrats were printing out did not match the actual districts. So on Twitter, the districts were stuck in a position of showing their numbers. And so people were finding discrepancies between what they were saying the numbers were versus what the numbers actually were. And to make it that much more awesome, they said, these numbers are accurate. One, don't challenge us. These numbers are accurate. And they said, we're leaking these numbers this way, not to help Pete. We're not cherry picking. They were cherry picking. But we're releasing the numbers this way for quality control. We want to make sure these numbers are right. And what happens? People start saying, wait a minute. Your numbers don't match what the precinct is saying. The precincts would say, we gave them these numbers almost like a day ago. It shows Sanders winning this particular one. It would edge that vote up, but they're not accepting this. State delegate equivalence, by the way, is the term, not estimates. It's equivalent. They left that value in the public's consciousness for God knows how long. Finally, as it gets to 73%, Oh, I'm sorry, 97%. And you find that Sanders, state delegate equivalent, and despite being 6,000 votes ahead, which he was, the state delegate equivalent still had Buttigieg with a 0.2 lead. I'm sorry, 0.1 lead with 3% to go. And it was an issue of state delegates. And Buttigieg complained about the state delegates because he wasn't going to get those state delegates. Not state delegates, I'm sorry, satellite districts. So there were certain areas where they had various, most of which were indigenous communities, but like meat packing plants and these type of things where these guys can go and have a caucus at these various satellite districts. And so Buttigieg complained that the satellite districts were getting too much value because, again, at this point, 97%, and they stopped the vote count. They stopped the vote count. Here, they stopped the vote count. For days, they stopped the vote count. Now, I said, how can you ever trust these numbers? They got caught giving Sanders numbers to Tom Steyer. They got caught giving Bernie Sanders numbers to Patrick Duvall or Duvall Patrick. And the moment that you see that, and you catch that on multiple occasions, like over and over and over again, then at that point, I have no way to trust the numbers. There's no way. I don't expect all of my burners out there to be catching these numbers. And even if you catch a few, I have no expectations for you to catch all of them, which therein lies the problem, right? At that point, you can't trust the numbers. How can you trust the values? How can you trust the numbers? Sanders could be further ahead. Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden may have more votes than that. Pete may have less votes than that. Pete had the Des Moines registry poll shut down. That poll is the gold standard. Pete was in third place in that poll. Bernie Sanders declares himself a winner because he has 6,000 more votes. And there was no way you were ever going to catch up with 3%, those 6,000 more votes. So he said, I won. I'm calling it. I won. Now, my point was, more likely than not, despite media living off of the state delegate equivalent vote total, the reality of it is, if a guy gets 6,000 more votes and you end up splitting the delegates, he wins the first and the second round, I'm going to say that guy won. And if you say this fictional thing of state delegate equivalents means more than the fact that the guy got 6,000 more votes, I'm going to think you are insane. It is a narrative that these guys are pushing out there as if this is the thing that wins. Well, he got 6,000 more votes. Now, my point was, we don't even know if Buttigieg was able to hold on to this because they were only at 97%, meaning that 0.1 might have failed. It was only 3 state delegates votes in that case. Pete Buttigieg gets on CNN for his town hall. And guess when they release all of the results? The moment that Pete Buttigieg stands up for his town hall. Meaning they leaked out numbers to the public, fraudulent numbers, because again, they already had the numbers. Many of those numbers ended up being wrong, despite the fact that they said they were giving quality control checks. I bet they were giving quality checks. And now, after leaking it for days and days and days, Pete Buttigieg gets on the town hall, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, entirely coincidental, 100% reported, Buttigieg 26.2, Sanders 26.1, Buttigieg 564 state delegate equivalents, Sanders 562.5. I don't know how you're going to get that 0.5. Now, CNN says, hey, you won. Yeah, you lost by 6,000 more votes, but you won. But did he? What CNN apparently did not see was that there was an independent investigation by NBC News of the Iowa caucus. What do you think it came up with? Inconsistencies, errors. The numbers just don't add up. They even go so far as to say there are votes that can never be figured out because of how bad this particular caucus was run. If this was Bolivia, the United States would have sent the military in order to fix the situation. This is an Iowa caucus. I would make the point that they tried to rig this for Pete Buttigieg, and it went horribly awry. It was so bad, in fact, that even the media starts getting involved in wanting to see the numbers. Media in this country has somewhat of an impetus. It has a modus operandi of not necessarily wanting to impugn the character, the validity of elections, even if there's reason to do so. Looking at this one, though, that's how royally fucked up this election was. They reported 100% of the results, and immediately an investigation found that these results were BS. So much so that determining who won is impossible. But hey, it's CNN, right? CNN doesn't need to be factual. They just need to, jump ahead to get the story. In this particular case, I want to go through the article that makes the point that said this election, you're not going to be able to figure out who won. Not in any real sense of the word. Yeah, you may be able to put votes together, you may be able to patch this stuff together, but the election is so close, meaning the 26.1, from the standpoint of the popular vote, Pete Buttigieg got blown out, 6,000 more votes. But from the standpoint of the state delegate equivalent, this made up number, it's so close that the fact that you might have lost votes somewhere, or the fact that the numbers don't add up, or the fact that there's so many inconsistencies in this caucus. Like I said, if we were finding stuff that was wrong, there had to be more than what we were finding, because there was no way we were going to see all of the information associated with the primary. The fact that we were able to find that much gets across how bad this was run. And yet they still try to help Pete. And by the way, Pete's mission was accomplished. He got his bump, despite the fact not deserving it. He got his bump. 6 points, if I'm not mistaken. It depends on the poll that you're looking at. Iowa needs to be expunged. All of these delegates needs to be extinguished. You need to rip this away from Iowa. They forfeited their opportunity to have a caucus in this particular electoral cycle. I don't know if they were outright cheating from the standpoint of trying to steal votes, meaning the company with that the device was created that way. I do know it stinks and it looks dodgy. It does look like the Iowa Democratic Party did what it could to extend the notion of Pete getting a bump and to injure Sanders by, for the most part, hitting him in the knees. Meaning, instead of Sanders being able to come out on day one and saying, I got 6,000 more votes, I won. And Buttigieg might have been able to say, well, I have this delegate equivalent stuff. That didn't happen. Instead, you were able to gut Sanders and stop him from getting the forward bump that he would have typically gotten from something like this and give it to Pete, despite the fact that Pete didn't have the numbers to substantiate it. And of course, media never said anything about it, meaning how are you calling yourself a winner when you don't know the result total? They didn't call him on it. Let's get into the problems with the Iowa caucus. Welcome to a late night, blurry-eyed, probably should be in bed, up early in the morning soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. We like to say this content is brought to you by you, so even $1 helps. I've been so angry going for the last few days. When I say white hot rage, I mean white hot rage. We were working at the station today. Oh, by the way, we will start. We got the official go-ahead, so we will be starting on the 18th. That will be the first show, Political Misfits. We did our show today. We got the go-ahead. The show went well. So we have a few more dry runs, but we'll be starting on the 18th. It was a long intro. I felt like I needed to explain how I was looking at this. I've done multiple videos on how, so I'm not necessarily going to delve into it. But it's a very basic point that if you have an establishment that is very clear, like not whisper, very overt, in the newspapers, opined on MSNBC, politicians having these conversations, how do we stop this guy? Then when I see the Iowa caucus, and I know Buttigieg is acceptable to them, he's just like one of them, well, I can look at this and I can see that they want to stop him. It's possible that Iowa would be one of the stops where they would try to actually stop him. And I can't put anything past them considering what took place in 2016. So when you see the slow drip of votes and you go with that premise, yet framing of the world, then right off the bat, it is very clear why they're doing that from that framing of the world. It just so happened that framing was right. There's so many problems with this tally that this needs to be expunged. I mean, Iowa needs to lose its delegates for this particular season. Now, the fact that that hurts Buttigieg, I don't particularly care. They lost their right to have this vote tally. This vote tally is so magnificently fucked up that it is almost impossible to know who actually won. Let's go to the story for the moment. The Iowa Democratic Caucus results are rife with potential errors and inconsistencies that could affect the outcome of the election, according to a review by NBC News Decision Desk. The apparent mistakes spotted in at least dozens of the state's 1,711 precincts call into question the accuracy of the outcome of Iowa's first in the nation caucus, which was held Monday night. Now, what did I say on this? My point was, it is impossible for any campaign to know if these numbers are right. Why do I know that? I know that because they got caught transposing numbers that belong to Sanders into other people's vote totals, which means that I have no way to know as a factual basis that they wouldn't have done the same to other vote totals. Meaning when Joe Biden says, or his Simone Sanders says she's not accepting the results, how is she wrong? How is she wrong? How does he know as a flat fact with everything that went on with this particular primary, this particular election, these particular vote totals, how do they know that the numbers are right? And why would you accept these numbers? If your name is Joe Biden, why would you accept these numbers? You should be calling for this to be, for the most part, expunged. That's all. That's just a rational human being looking at it with a certain degree of rational doubt and something that has shown itself to deserve a lot of suspicion and doubt. In some individual precincts, it may be possible to fix the errors. In other precincts, it will probably be impossible to determine how voters truly made their choices. That means that this is screwed up so much that there are some votes that might just be gone. There may be some people that you can't really figure out what they wanted because of how bad the Iowa caucus was run. First caucus, it's supposed to be fair, it was supposed to be transparent, and apparently it was none of the above. None of the above. And add that to the other stuff, right? Tom Perez allowing Bloomberg to get into the race. He gives the DNC $325,000, and it's not just that. It's also he's a billionaire. He could fund all of these candidates in an organization that is fundamentally bankrupt. So every impetus in the world is for Tom Perez to do that and to be okay to cater to somebody like a Bloomberg, especially if it holds the monster at bay, that monster being, to his standpoint, Bernie Sanders. Yes, they're trying to stop him. They're trying to stop him. But certainly, you knew they would. So that's right here. Numbers don't add up. Let's just go into some of the items. Here are some of the examples of potential errors and inconsistencies. NBC News has not called a winner in the first in the nation contest. Why? Because the contest was so fucked up that they can't determine who a winner is. CNN is declaring the winner. Hey, Pete, you won. Did I win? Yes, Pete, you won. Again, enshrining a narrative that's just not true. It's just not true. I said this from day one because what I said was true. Nobody knows who won that contest. And they still don't know who won the contest because the contest was so screwed up that the results are, you can't make a determination on faulty results. The numbers don't add up. The decision desk said it identified at least 77 precincts, or 4.5%, where the total votes for what is known as reallocated candidate preference is greater than the total for the initial candidate preference, a difference that makes no sense. 5 people go into a room. 5 people say, all right, I like Bob, so let's go with Bob. Round 2, 5 people into a room. 7 people say, I like Bob. It's like, what? Where did the other 2 come from? Where did the other 2 come from? That's not curious. Why are you going to assume that it was incompetence? Think back to Donna Brazile for the moment. When Donna Brazile wrote that piece for, I think it was Politico, talking effectively about how Clinton essentially bought the DNC. What did she say about Deborah Wasserman-Schultz? She said Debbie was not a good manager. Now, is it Debbie wasn't a good manager, or Debbie had ran Hillary Clinton's campaign? They had an extremely close relationship. Debbie Wasserman-Schultz had, for the most part, just given control because she wanted Clinton to win anyway. And what's the point of me being a middleman when I can just hand it over to you? It wasn't that she was a bad manager. That assumes incompetence. She was corrupt. That assumes malfeasance, which is more apt to be right. Which one do you think it is, malfeasance or incompetence, for Deborah Wasserman-Schultz? And why do you assume this is different? They effectively had invisible people that showed up in regards to the numbers. This has to be investigated. This has to be investigated. Like, this is almost clear fuckery in some way. And again, I make the point that you should not assume that it's a mistake. You have people coming out of the ether, apparently, for somebody, I suspect Buttigieg. But I don't know that, so I can't nail that for certain. But the fact that you have additional people, ghosts, in this system that are apparently voting, that should invalidate almost the entirety of this. This is kind of my point. How can you go forward with a result when you have results like this? I'm just saying, it's horrendous. Therefore, it doesn't make sense that the number of voters would increase during the process. If anything, it might decline since Caucus, whose initial preference didn't make the visibility, might choose to simply leave rather than sticking around and support another candidate. Well, just like I said, 5 people walk into a room, 5 people make an initial vote. You go around for the second vote, 8 people make a vote, even though there are only 5 people in the room. And yet the number of voters appear to have increased in precinct Des Moines 62 Polk County. The number of votes recorded for the initial preference was 784, but the total number of votes in the precinct on the reallocated preference increased to 841. That's a lot of votes somebody was getting. Right? Ghost. It is unclear how to explain the increase between rounds because the initial preference is supposed to include votes of everyone who is participating in the caucus. The initial preference should reflect the total turnout in the caucus. I hope you get what they're saying. That's a big fucking deal. You have 1,000 people in the room. They make their votes. Well, the fact that you have 1,000 people in the room, your total vote shouldn't be more than 1,000 because you have 1,000 people in the room that made their first votes. If at the end of the second round, you have 1,000 people in the room, but there are 1,300 votes, where did the 300 ghosts come from? Who did those 300 ghosts vote for? And does this not look like the pattern that people make the point of this kind of fractional voting thing where you make your vote and it will give the person 1.5 for a particular person? I mean, this stinks. This totally stinks. Who did these votes go for? That's astonishing. And regardless of who the votes went for, you have visible people in your voting system. I'm just saying, those votes are going somewhere. How do you make a determination on who won with election results like this? Some of the discrepancies are a result of 0 votes being reported for the initial preference. On Des Moines' 80th precinct, for example, there was 0 total reported votes for the initial preference vote and 215 total votes in the reallocated preference vote. Because the precinct has no votes recorded for the candidates on the initial preference round, it's impossible to know whether or not the reallocation was correctly done in the precinct. Moreover, because the precinct is not contributing any votes to the total candidate votes on the initial preference ballot, and the statewide percentages for candidates doing well in the precinct also will be understated. Issues with the delegate equivalents. The decision desk also said it found allocation of state delegate equivalents, the caucus's most important prize for candidates, that are hard to reconcile with other data being reported out of the precinct. Iowa Democratic Caucus results are not actual votes cast. The percentages received by candidates based on returns of the estimated number of state convention delegates won by each candidate through the caucus process known as state delegate equivalents, or SDEs. Because the 41 elected delegates that Iowa is sending to the Democratic Convention are elected by state delegates selected by the Iowa caucus results, issues with the SDEs are potentially more consequential in terms of the overall Democratic nomination for president. Under the rules, candidates should not receive SDEs if they have less than 15% of support in the reallocated preference vote. Despite that, the decision does said it found at least 15 precincts where candidates received SDEs despite being below the 15% threshold. In all but the smallest precincts, the rules state that the viability of threshold is determined by multiplying the number of votes by 0.15 and rounding up to the nearest whole number. However, it appears that the viability threshold was calculated by rounding down in several precincts Monday night. No candidate seems to have benefited disproportionately from the misappropriation of the rules. There were at least 6 instances where Sanders benefited, 4 favoring Buttigieg, 2 by the former vice president, 1 for Klobuchar, and 1 for Warren. With a tally this close, how do you validate this election as being won by anybody? And are we not at the point where Iowa should be punished? Whether they were trying to cheat or whether this was incompetence, are we not at the point where they should be punished and these votes should, for the most part, just be expunged? New Hampshire, here we come. You're the first state. Iowa, you've lost your delegates for this particular year. That's where I'm at. If we can't determine who the actual candidate that won, which it seems that it is impossible to do so because of the way the votes were tallied and the rules that were broken, not to mention the figures that just don't add up, the invisible people that apparently are showing up in the vote tallies, you can't give anybody that election. You can't give anybody that election. Which ultimately, I suppose, is a win for Buttigieg because he's the one that went running screaming that he won, and he gets the bump for something that is, for all intents and purposes, looks like a fraudulent, dodgy election. The entire point of the way they were doing Iowa was to ensure that there was transparency in the vote. If they didn't do the vote total like this, you would have never known this was taking place. You would have never known. Man, Aaron Hampton. Chris Cuomo announced Pete as the winner just as he walked out on stage as a CNN town hall. 100% results were released at the same time Sanders left. Yes, that's what I said. Yes. Effectively, they held the... If there was any doubt that what I was saying was true, meaning they were leaking the results to give a false impression to the media itself, in order for the public to give this idea that Pete somehow won something that Pete didn't necessarily win. When you see how dodgy and fucked up these results are, does CNN not know that? Meaning Chris Cuomo coming out calling him the winner when 100% of the results. Chris Cuomo doesn't even ask the question, wow, it's pretty interesting that these results came out the moment that you walked out. Is it possible that there were coordination in order to ensure that this happened exactly this particular way? Chris Cuomo doesn't ask that question. It's possible that Chris Cuomo is on that station because he doesn't ask that question. Danny Vela Perez, thank you. Denise Gibson, 53. Mayo cheat should be removed from the presidential run as a consequences for his criminal action of rigging the votes. Well, that's just it. We don't know if he rigged the votes. Like, what they're going to say is, our bad, we're just fucking morons. That's what they're going to say. And we just massively fucked up. Nothing to see here, folks. Now, the catch here is, this will be Iowa Democrats, not necessarily Pete. Just because they might have been helping Pete out, just because they might have been leaking the votes in order to give Pete a bump going into New Hampshire, giving him his best shot to get the best result in New Hampshire, we don't necessarily know if Pete had anything with the, quote, rigging of the votes. We don't even know if there was communication going back and forth where they were giving him a heads up on the vote tallies. Like, we have no idea this kind of incestuous relationship between the DNC, the Iowa Democrats, Pete Buttigieg, and Hillary Clinton staffers, and Obama staffers. We don't know. So you can't necessarily rap Pete on knuckles. You can call him a sleazeball and a liar. Fair enough, those things fit. But you can't necessarily say he cheated in the overt sense of the word. They did seem to work in coordination, yes. And in working coordination, that of course brings up questions. And I got to be honest, I don't understand why there wouldn't be an investigation into how bad this was. Looks like even if it was an FBI getting involved, trying to question whether or not there was some kind of attempt at election interference, especially with this notion of ghosting the various people who are out there voting. I don't believe they're going to do that, but why wouldn't they do that? Think about what is taking place here. These people are running for president of the United States. It is possible that this dodgy vote total was intentionally done this way. And if so, and let's say it this way, we don't know that, first of all, and wouldn't you need an investigation to determine that? And it's not like you don't have evidence of impropriety, meaning from the standpoint of all of these people that have an explicit interest in wanting to stop Sanders. You can pull article after article after article, all of the consternation, all of the talking. It is very clear that the Democratic establishment wants to stop him and find him unacceptable. And Pete, to his buddy at the Iowa Democrats, yeah, he's acceptable to them. And so if he could work around the edges to find a way to get Pete a bump, yes, he would take that. The question becomes, why are the results this fucked up? Who was responsible for the results being this fucked up? And not take the incompetence answer on its face. I'm sick of the incompetence answer being used to cover. Like, in that last election, 2016, Hillary Clinton was money laundering. Literally money laundering. Having money sent through the state parties to end right back up in New York for her to be able to use it. No investigation. Nobody pushed for that. They ran no stories. The stories almost like air. No Democrat cared about it because it was Hillary Clinton. And now you have something like this where it's possible they were outright trying to shaft one of the candidates in the race. And they were pleading incompetence. And they would say, our bad. Iowa should lose their delegates over this. If Pete cheated, well, that sucks for Pete because New Hampshire is the only other state he'd get delegates in real terms. They should lose their delegates. Dilly y'all. 357. I would love to see your reaction to Iowa's coin flip gate. I've done the coin flip thing, right? Where the guy like flipped the coin and he was like, you know, that stuff. And it's like, oh, dude, that's so shady. That's so shady. He looked at the coin. He clearly looked at the coin. All of the coin flips kept going to Pete. This is kind of like in the other election where all the coin flips went to Hillary. So yeah, it's so dodgy. Like, honest, it's so dodgy. It's like the guy never has learned ever how to flip a coin. I've done the video. I think this was a few days ago when this first came out. I did the video. Joel Sass, and I'll let this be the end because I'm dragging ass. But the key point here is NBC News hasn't called this. NBC News hasn't called this because the election results are so screwed up that it's almost impossible at this point to call it. The numbers don't add up. They have ghosts in the figures. And they didn't even follow some of the rules in regards to how they were going to round the numbers. There's several problems with this. And in a situation where you have an election that's this close, I don't know how you're going to find it. Jamal, I love you. Please move your laptop away from the mic. Oh, I see. The fan sounds like a jet engine and it cycles up and down every 30 seconds. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, believe it or not, it's nowhere near the mic. It's just that computer is a workhorse. I'll try to find a way to maybe move it elsewhere or something or put it down. I'll try to find somewhere around it. But I'm sorry. I don't want the jet engine sound in your ears. That could be a problem. Bernie won't do anything about it. Hell, neoliberal. It's a good friend of mine. Us all the way to the brokered convention. Yes. Look, I do have qualms about what took place in this one. Sanders clearly was thinking about the fact that he was going to get cheated. It just seems like it was there. He preempted their results, meaning he wasn't going to have their narrative imposed upon him. So again, good idea. Waiting for this long to declare a victory, though. And to be fair to Sanders, you know, Pete Buttigieg is a slimier figure than Sanders. So Sanders, ideologically, could not bring himself to do something like that. He brought himself to do that when he realized I'm 6,000 votes up. Yeah, I'm calling it a win. But fact is, they didn't allow him to do that on the night that he should have been able to do it. And unfortunately, even if they would have given you the numbers on that night, the numbers are so fucked up and maligned that it's hard to know who would have won anyway. Meaning, NBC News hasn't called it, despite what CNN is saying. NBC News is effectively saying we can't look at these results and come to a conclusion about who won because these results don't make sense. The DNC, right after 2016, this is the first one they're doing. Stay classy, DNC. Or I should say Iowa Caucus. And by the way, Tom Perez should lose his job. Honestly. Because think about it for the moment. Tom Perez is the one who's, at the end of the day, the buck stops with Tom. And if Tom Perez is running elections this shoddy, where the entire point was supposed to be transparency and allowing people to know that they're not going to be cheated, you have validated with this one election every concern and fear that every Bernie supporter from 2016 has had going into this race. You have validated all of those people who say you would never get a fair shot in the DNC. You have validated all of those people that said they're going to cheat him again and Sanders is going to stand by there and let him do it. In this case, in the caucus, he could catch him. I'm more doubtful in some of the other states. But you validated all of those people in this one caucus. Sanders has to be able to protect the vote. Period. He has to. Otherwise, it's like this to some degree gives us what we're going into, meaning this is what this is going to look like. If they're willing to do this to this extent in Iowa, the first state after 2016 where the notion was supposed to be transparency, yes, these guys were incompetent, and yes, this is probably going to draw more eyes to it, but it draws more eyes if you can come up with a narrative saying, we don't know if this wasn't malicious, especially with this notion of trying to stop Sanders. Now, I don't know how you make that argument, but that argument should be floated big time. Because the next time something like this happens, you want the media primed with the narrative already that they want to stop this guy. Allowing them to say, oh, this was just incompetence, allows it to be a one-off. When it's very possible, this is not a one-off. This is just a playbook. Especially in pursuit of helping their person. All right, I'm going to end this because I'm self-conscious about that fan now. Shout out, Jess, let me know. And I think I got everybody. I feel like I'm missing somebody. All right, dragon ass. So I'm going to say like, share. I'm just checking. I don't want to miss Windows 1. And subscribe. Oh, okay, I read that one. Majin Buu. Bernie won. Bernie won't do anything about it. Neoliberal is a good friend of mine. Oh, right. Like Joe Biden is a good friend of mine. He did that to town hall. I hate that too. Us all the way to the brokered convention. And he will lose that brokered convention. Yes. But look, it's possible. Sanders does have a path to winning this outright. And if Nate Silver, who acted as if Sanders had zero chance, is now talking about Sanders is at 17, he's like 200 points away. That's a major change, man. Like, Nate Silver is somewhat of an AK, though, and almost like doesn't believe that the politics comes into play in the way that these guys act with one another. Bad Mama Jamma. So does the whole get money out of politics thing include these bogus coin tosses? I hope so. I hope so. Love the show, brother. Keep the pressure on these motherfuckers. You know what's funny? My wife, and I'll leave it here because my wife is going to be like, I can't believe you said that. So my wife, her mom is somewhat posh. You know, it's just how she comes across. And she left a message on my wife's answer machine one day. And she was like, those motherfuckers. Now, she said this like a Dolomite flick. Like if you ever watch Dolomite or Samuel L. Jackson drop a motherfucker, he says it probably better than anybody else. He is competition. He is competition. That was one of the funniest fucking messages. She wasn't trying to be funny. She was pissed off. I forgot what she was pissed off about. But yeah, those motherfuckers. Yeah. All right. Like, share, subscribe.